first speaker series here for Black History Month. We will be having 3 virtual speakers. Michelle is the first, and then we'll be having 2 more on the 19th and the 26th. We're also going to be having our kind of main event is next week on the 12th. We'll have at 10 o'clock a little pre-recorded video that will be available to everyone to learn about the history of the Freedom of Choice Initiative in Virginia. And then we're going to kind of the precursor to the installation of a new historic roadside marker that will be going in front of the Louisa County High School in honor of the 13 students who integrated Louisa County High School in August of 1965. So that's kind of our placement ceremony, and it'll be a big celebration for everyone in the community, kind of marking a little known but very historic moment in the history of the county. I'm Caitlin Coughlin. For those of you who have not met me or seen me virtually, I'm the new executive director at the Historical Society. And on board here today, we also have Marilyn Campbell, who is the African American history guru. She's the one who's in charge of all of our programming and grants for the African American history program. She's our grant program manager. So she's going to say a little bit, probably. Do you want to say something now, or you want to wait till later?
Yes. Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thank you for coming out on this Saturday morning. And basically, I just want you to know that the African American History Program is sponsoring this event for the month of February. We will have speakers throughout the month. You can go to the Louisa County website, louisahistory.org, to register for all of those events that are scheduled. I do want you to know that the African American History Program was birthed out of a need. The Historical Society recognized that they have historically underrepresented African American life and culture. Our effort with the program is to document oral histories, is to foster one project you might very well know of is the Freedom of Choice Remembrance Project. The 13 students that first desegregated the Louisa County High School. We have that historical marker that will be erected next week, February 12th at 2 o'clock. And a third project is that of telling local history, developing the resources and the reference materials and the curriculum for local history in the local schools. We ask for your support. We are in community together. We are to preserve, enlighten, share the history of all of the people in Louisa County. So there's room for everyone. Thank you and have a great day. And Michelle Taylor, thank you for coming on this morning, reclaiming our family history.
So Michelle is kind of a freelance genealogist. You're now in Maryland, right?
Yes. So I live in Maryland.
No, you're fine. But she's kind of been around. I actually met Michelle many years ago when she was at Montpelier. I was an archaeologist at Monticello. So she kind of incorporates archaeology, history, and genealogy into the research of her family, particularly looking at public archaeology and mapping, cemetery preservation. She's worked throughout the state of Virginia, most notably at James Madison's Montpelier in Orange County, just adjacent to us in Louisa. And one of the things that's really, at least from my perspective as an archaeologist, is really interesting is that, she's been able to work at this intersection between oral history and genealogy and archaeology and that material culture to kind of look at the lived experiences of her ancestors as enslaved individuals at Montpelier. So Michelle kind of started this as an undergraduate, and since completing that has focused her graduate studies on uncovering the narratives and contributions of African Americans throughout history. So I will let you take it away, Michelle, and we will be having, to answer the question in the chat, we will have a recorded version of this available, and we'll have a survey as well going out afterwards via email. So we'll have about 45 minutes of presentation, or however long it takes you, Michelle, and then we'll do some question and answer afterwards. So I'll let you take it away.
Wonderful. Just want to make sure you can hear me.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin, and thank you, Miss Marilyn, including both the Louisa County Historical Society as a whole. I'm very excited to get started today talking about a topic that's very important and close to me. I am going to put my presentation in full screen, so I won't be able to see questions, but if there's any questions that need to be answered during the presentation, I know Caitlin or Ms. Marilyn will let me know. So let me get started. I appreciate it. So as the title, Reclaiming Our Family History, and I chose this topic. I've talked about this topic many times in the past, but especially during Black History Month, there's so much importance to being able to define those family history stories that we've been told over time and taking ownership of what we hadn't in the past. So I got to get started with a little bit of background on myself. I actually grew up and born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and I attended college at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I graduated. When I moved to Virginia in 2010, I started doing my own personal genealogy, which led me to taking the train weekly to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and using the records there to find out more about my family history. But before going to the National Archives, I did a lot of my research on the computer, listening to family stories that my mom, my cousins, and elders had shared with me. And that led me to finding out that my second great grandmother had applied for a widow's pension during the Civil War. So in this photo here, I'm going through a stack of documents for her pension files. And then while I was an undergraduate student, I was able to talk with a professor, Dr. Bernard Means, about archaeology opportunities and how I had found out that my family had an ancestral connection to James Madison's Montpelier. And that professor shared with me that they did archaeology programs. So as an undergraduate student, I was able to partake in excavation programs at James Madison's Montpelier. And that was the beginning of my archaeology career, so say. During that first trip to James Madison's Montpelier, it was for archaeologists being able to find lots of relics and material culture. That's not always the case. A lot of times, a lot of digging and very few artifacts. But during this first trip, I was able to find a lot of very interesting finds by doing archaeology side by side with professionals in the field. In the picture on the left, you'll see I'm holding a broken part of Dutch iron. So this would have been a pan that we inferred that the enslaved community would have used to cook with. And on the right, you'll see that I was going and looking at soil samples and using like a power hose to go and look at each sample we found through the soil. So that experience was, it was just continuous opportunities to see firsthand how important archaeology plays in telling the stories that often haven't been told in the past. And also, so often enslaved communities are not in the written records. So archaeology having that firsthand opportunity to allow people to be able to find where their ancestral ties are and find out more about the stories of those who lived in the past. One of the people I met during the first trip to Montpelier was a distant cousin, Rebecca Gilmore Coleman. And I credit everyone in the Montpelier community credits her so much for all of her contributions. If it wasn't for her, the home of her great grandfather, George Gilmore, would not have been preserved. And that was my first time meeting her. As you see, it was after a long day of doing archaeology, and her reaching out to the Montpelier Foundation led to the Montpelier Foundation doing excavation on this home and restoring it to its appearance during the time of her great grandfather during the late 1800s. Some of the other programs that they have at Montpelier, not just the excavation expeditions, but you'll see in these photos that these are two different um, these are two different excavations that I attended, and each year the location of these excavations change. So basically, it can be taking place on any part of the estate at Montpelier. Here, you'll see on the left, we were working in the field slave quarters, and on the right, we were working in the south yard. Some of the archaeological methods that as a student I started to learn but were able to use firsthand when I went to Montpelier were surveying, which is when one of the first steps with archaeology is looking at the site, walking around and seeing if there's anything that stands out in the ground, in the features in the ground. Um, Not as much dendrochronology has gone on in recent years, but it's when you're looking at the rings of a log to date how old this log is, which was very important in determining the age of the Gilmore cabin, since that was dating back to early 1800s, as well as like another tool we use are shovel test pits, and that is when you take a tool to go into the ground to pull out any artifacts that may be in that area to see if it's a suitable area for excavating. We have radiocarbon dating, something else that's not always used, but also allows you to date how old a certain artifact or relic is. And lastly, as you've seen in the previous slide, water screening, which is when you examine soil samples to see if you can find smaller artifacts that may not be seen by the naked eye. Some of the other programs that Montpelier has are the log cabin excavations. They have a metal detecting program, as well as for students that are in college, they can do field schools or internships. I want to make sure that people are aware that they can visit Montpelier's website for the upcoming field schools they'll have this summer. And one of the things that are very important with these programs is it allows students to get their firsthand, experience seeing if they really enjoy archaeology. Also, these programs can lead to paid internships. The director of archaeology at Montpelier and the entire archaeology department is very um, vocal and advocates of having more African Americans in the field of archaeology. And the director of archaeology has said on many times that it's just important that the archaeology field is expanded and more inclusive. So they have a scholarship program for African Americans students who are interested in going into careers as archaeology, which would allow them to do excavation programs or attend the field school at no charge. So if you would like to know more about that, I have included the link on this slide. As Caitlin mentioned in her introduction, one of the areas of archaeology that I focus on is public archaeology, and that sense of bringing the public into the archaeology field. A lot of times in other disciplines, it's very geared to just academics, but with public archaeology, this allows the public to have a say so in what's being excavated, how it is commemorated, and how can the public know more about their past communities. So in the photo on the right, you'll see that one thing that's very unique about Montpelier, so many of their archaeology excavations include those of descendants as well as the public. And just reiterating how important public archaeology is, especially in those of African American communities. In the previous photo, you'll see the two descendants are actually excavating under Gilmore Cabin, which which was the home of George Gilmore and his wife and children during the 1800s. You'll see that actually in the census on the right, George Gilmore, his wife, and children are all listed living in Orange County, and this cabin is now referred to as Gilmore Cabin. Another unique aspect of Gilmore Cabin, aside from George Gilmore building onto this cabin after the end of slavery, was the fact that he was able to later on purchase it before his death. So I talked a lot about like my background and how this connects to the Montpelier descendant community, but a lot of times people ask, well, how do I also get started? So there's so many ways that I know it's a combination of family historians, genealogists, and those who are just interested in history who are in attendance today. But some of these are things that we often do, but then we just need to keep doing them over and over. So, like writing down those surnames, important dates, and locations associated with your family history. Of course, contacting anyone who is an elder that may be able to fill in information you are not knowledgeable of. Also, locating photos. I think this is such an important topic because a lot of times, even in my research, there's lack of photos. So being able to reach out to people you may have heard or related to you, or just friends of the family who may be able to provide you with photos you've never seen, or also being able to reach out to Facebook groups and seeing if they can help you with obtaining these photos or historical documents of your past ancestors. Another one, of course, which is very significant to our group today, is reaching out to your historical society. Being able to reach out to your historical society is so important because if you know you have family in a certain region, the historical society may have collections or exhibitions that have been done that may entail more information about your family. And lastly, for adoptees, being able to request that unamended birth certificate, although it varies from state to state, those non identifying information can be the jumpstart you need in finding out more about your family history. There are several platforms where you can create family trees, but I've listed a few here, including Ancestry, Family Search, MyHeritage, and Genie. All of these websites will allow you to upload family trees for free, but with Ancestry, you do have to pay to use their records as well as MyHeritage. If you like a completely free, if you like a completely free family tree, Family Search and Genie are your best options. Some pointers that I've learned throughout the years is whenever you're meeting someone or having an opportunity to talk with them, collect those oral histories, especially the elders. You'll see here as pictured my uncle and aunt in Kentucky that I hadn't ever met because they were like a great uncle and aunt to me. I went to visit them and I was able to take my iPad and record some stories they shared as well as taking photos right then in their home instead of like coming back or taking the photos out of the home and scanning them. So making sure you have your phone or tablet right on you to take those oral histories and record them, and not just keeping them on your phone but uploading it to like a hard drive or some kind of cloud system to ensure that you're able to um, keep those documents for the long haul. You'll also see here on another visit to Kentucky, I was able to meet the oldest living relative in my family and talk with him. His name was Alfonso Vance. And Alfonso, he served in World War II. So when I met him and his wife, he was able to fill in a lot of information that I hadn't heard before, as well as confirming the research that I had done. Like as I already mentioned, like being able to get oral history is important, but also being able to use the historical records to confirm if those oral histories are true. Um, Once again, with my cousin Rebecca Gilmore Coleman, her family lore was all detailing more information about the Gilmore family and having these older photos confirming this was their family's childhood home. So being able to have the oral history is important, but also seeing if there are historical records that confirm these oral histories. Another thing I'd like to talk about is using historical maps to locate family cemeteries. One unique aspect of the Gilmore cabin is the cemetery is located right behind the cabin. So, but there's not any tombstones there. So, oral history allowed archaeologists and historians to, confirm that this is where the family was buried. And even furthermore, the size of the stones located where the cemetery were indicated who were in fact the parents versus the children who had passed away behind the Gilmore cabin. I include this historical map of Louisa County because in my own personal research, I have traced my ancestry to Louisa, as well as Orange County and many of the counties within the Piedmont, Virginia area. Um, One unique thing about historical maps are the fact that they have surnames on them that allow you to see where a family member or family name is from. So looking at these maps, if you know a county where you're from and you know a surname, you can look at these historical maps and see if you can pinpoint where your family may have lived in that town. Even if it wasn't them who owned the property, they may have the surname of those connected to their family. Another great point that you will see with all of African American history, at least in the United States, is those migration patterns. You'll see so often that even if you are someone who has multiple generations of family located in one state or region, as we go further back and look at the Great Migration, so many families have migrated to other parts of the United States for opportunities. And then you'll see here in the map provided by the census.gov that many people went north and northeast during these migration patterns, as well as a large amount of people going west to states like California. This is really important because if you are not aware of where your family has come from prior to the state you were born in, you can look at these migration patterns and see, like, for example, in Orange, many of the descendants who are living now have went either to California, New York, or other states that are very highly populated with jobs and opportunities during the 40s and 50s. I wanted to make sure that, for all those in attendance today, that they are aware of some of the online resources that are both free and some that are cost some money, but are very helpful in expanding your genealogical research. So I've included 3 newspaper websites as well as some free resources that'll help you with your research entailing the topics that I've discussed so far today. But one aspect that I cannot avoid talking about because it's so popular is, of course, DNA and which websites to use if you decide to do DNA tests. This will be more important in if you were interested in expanding your genealogy research further than paper trail. So DNA allows you to have that confirmation of anything that you've heard or disproving family lores. Upcoming is the 1950s US Census, and I wanted to make sure I plugged this in because if you're just getting started with your genealogy, this will be like an opportunity for you to, talk with people who may have been born in 1950 or before, and make it a project, make it something where you can sit down with someone who's 72 and older and say, let's look for you in the census, and then build your family tree going back from there. So this will be released on April 1st, and similar to the past census, it will probably not be indexed. So it can give you opportunity to volunteer to index the census. And when I say index, I'm referring to the documents will be scanned, but they won't be searchable. So they'll have volunteers from both FamilySearch.org and other genealogy websites having volunteers go ahead and transcribe these documents. When I personally did my DNA test, one of the main communities that came up is early Virginia African Americans. And me being someone who's born in Detroit, Michigan, I had no idea that that was where my ancestral ties were from. I had always heard through oral history about Kentucky and not so much about Virginia. But when I did the DNA test, it did confirm the historical records and research that I had done, that a lot of my family were early Virginians. In order to expand your research, it's very important that you have that visual aid of what does your family tree look like. And I think the most important part is when you get further back to particularly the great grandparents, you're talking about 16 different families. So I think it's important that before I started doing my research, I did not know the location, even though I had heard the names of most of my great great grandparents. I wasn't sure of their ancestry, their ancestral homes. And after doing extensive research, I determined that at least half of those 16 great grandparents had ties to Virginia, which was something I did not know prior to doing my research. Some of the popular DNA tests that can help you with expanding your genealogical research include the autosomal DNA, the mitochondrial DNA, the Y-DNA, and X-DNA tests, and these can be taken at various DNA companies. Of course, the most popular one from commercials and ads is Ancestry, which is an autosomal DNA test. But there are advantages to people doing all the tests as well as picking between which ones they're able to do. Like for a Y-DNA test, that would be limited to males being able to do that. But if you had a lore that you heard about that, oh, what happened to my great grandfather on my father's side, it would be best to get a male to do that. Or if your brick wall is on that side, getting a male family member can help you with that test. Similarly to the mtDNA, which is mitochondria, can help you find out about your foremothers. So I encourage people, if you're really invested in learning more about your family history, you of course do the test, but see if you can get any elders to also do the test so you can have an opportunity to go further back with your research. One of the unique features with doing the DNA test, you'll be able to see, particularly in this slide, they have an option for you to further your search once you get your results. So if you know that you have a certain surname, you can look that up, or a certain area where your family's from, you can do that as a part of your search. So two areas my family has deep ties to are Henderson County, Kentucky, and Orange County. And you'll see in the current slide, if you use both features, so entering my mom's surname and the county that we have family from, that'll allow us to find more relatives who may have ancestral connections connected to that particular surname. Through my research, I wanted to make sure that I was able to discuss finding my third great grandmother who was born in Louisa County. And in this record here, we have a, a part of her pension file where she discussed her birth location as well as those who enslavers who owned her. I'll read a snippet of it. I was born in Louisa County, Virginia. I first met Thomas Bentley, my husband, on Barrett's farm. I first belonged to William Sneed in Virginia, who sold me to Alexander B. Barrett. I have gone first by the name of Harriet Vance, widow of Lovelace Vance, who went to the army and never returned. When I first saw this document in person, it was very overwhelming because at that time I had lived in Virginia for only a year. And at that time, I did not know of any ancestor being from Virginia. So reading that in her words and seeing that there was this connection to Virginia and that her husband never returned, her first husband at least, it was just very overwhelming. But throughout the document, she continues to say when she became a teenager, she was sold to Orange County and then Henderson County, Kentucky. So whenever I'm looking through documents, particularly those of aunt's DNA, historical records, I'm always looking at those three counties, Louisa County, Orange County, and Henderson, because that was her migration pattern. She was born in Louisa, sold to Orange County, and then ultimately spent the rest of her life in Henderson, Kentucky. At the bottom, you'll see she was not able to read or write, so they had placed her mark. But underneath the list of signatures that were on this document was Georgiana Banks, which is my great great grandmother. So seeing her have her signature there without the X, and seeing her mother, my great 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 grandmother's signature next to it, is very important because that means Georgiana had an opportunity to learn to read and write. And just seeing that document and knowing the connection between Orange County and Louisa County is just very meaningful to me. I was able to also explore more sides of that family, including Georgiana Banks' mother-in-law, which would be my my third great grandmother on the same side of the family. And although the documents did not list her parents, this is a death certificate for Fanny Banks. It does say where she was buried. So I think another way to reclaim ancestry is making sure that you pay respect to your ancestors even in death, and being able to go back to this cemetery. I had learned that it had been neglected for many years, and I was unable to find many of my family members who were buried at the cemetery. I was thankfully able to find the tombstone for Fanny Catlett, but it was almost on the edge of a highway. And if you see in this aerial photo here, the cemetery, Mount Zion Cemetery, is located right on a highway in Henderson, Kentucky. So many descendants have come together and have advocated for the cemetery to be preserved, which has been very successful. So, as descendants, we do have the right to make every make every action to have our ancestors preserved in the most dignified ways. One second. A little bit more on those historical maps. You'll see here, this is a map of Henderson County, Kentucky, where I have ancestral ties. And although this record does show the surnames of different families who own property in this part of Henderson, when you look at a current aerial map view of the same area using Google Maps, you'll see that this entire area does not have anyone living in it. So it would definitely be ideal area to do archaeology, but if you went back to visit it now, which I did, there's nothing there. So makes it a little bit more difficult, but at least with those historical maps, you do know where they previously were. When I went to go look at this area, this is what I came across. It was documented in a will that there was supposed to be a cemetery here, but I couldn't get back to it, which was in 2016. But just a few years later, the county was able to add an impavement for descendants and others to be able to go visit this tombstone and cemetery in person. So that's something I just want people to think more about in their quest of being able to reclaim their ancestry, whether it's using the oral history, whether it's advocating for the preservation of family cemeteries, or whether it's being able to participate in those archaeology excavations and having a voice at the table as decisions are made. I think those are the big takeaways I want people to have when reclaiming their family ancestry. And I'd like to give a special thanks to the Louisa County Historical Society for allowing me to speak today about some of my research and some of the ways that we can improve reclaiming our ancestry. Thank you so much.
That was great and always fun for me because I get to see people I know and put your photos. I've been filling out some information in the questions in our chat, just kind of access to resources that we have. One of them in particular, which I can answer partially, but where is the best place to find county resources for historic maps? We obviously have some of them, like the Hotchkiss one that you showed in your presentation. We have that in the museum. But our map access is limited to certain extents. Are there other resources in the county particularly like the courthouse, et cetera, that you have found very helpful for, doing this kind of research?
Definitely. For Orange County, particularly, one way I've been able to learn more about the maps is looking at academic research that's been produced by the staff at Montpelier, because they have the most knowledge about those maps. So instead of going to the going to the courthouse, I just, have been able to, do a quick Google Scholar search and look and see who's writing what and seeing what kind of maps have, that are out there. But usually these maps are coming from like Library of Congress. Some have come from the courthouse, but it's not that many. And of course, I think it's important to stress that county maps usually are listing people who are either enslavers or those who are not. It's not going to list someone who was enslaved because they're not going to own property. So if your ancestor's name changed many times, like in the case of my third great grandmother, who had her name changed because of being sold to different families, I think it makes it a lot more difficult. And I definitely wanted to like talk about that aspect because, she spent time in Louisa County and had the surname. But then when she mentions the name of Alexander Barrett, the Barrett family also owned notable, I hate to say that, like people like Henry Box Brown. So that was another well-known person who had been formerly, who had been enslaved and owned by the Barrett family. So there's definitely this connection to the big families who own lots of people. But how do we find out what contributions our ancestors had, and moving away from the contributions of what those who enslaved them had did?
Yeah, and I think that's really key. I mean, my work at Monticello was primarily focused on how we kind of rectify our understanding of what the landscape looked like and what the maps show. Because at Monticello, Jefferson mapped everything, like trees, but not where enslaved communities lived. And that, is the majority of the people who were on that landscape, and they're just completely erased. And the oral history has been very important at Monticello. And one of the things you said, which really, was important to me, was at Monticello, for anyone who has been there, the parking lot where the visitor center now is on the mountaintop, there is a fenced off area in the center, which is where one of the cemeteries were for the enslaved community. And that was found purely on oral histories. There was this oral history that's where it was located. And when they went to build the visitor center, the archaeologists were like, we have to test to make sure that there's nothing here, because there is this oral history. And sure enough, they did survey, and that's where they were able to find all of the shafts. So, it's one of those things that archaeology, especially in this regard, has to incorporate these other lines of communication, because it's a group of people who are entirely hidden in the historical records for the most part.
Absolutely. And I think I just want to stress what you said about surveying. Like a lot of the pinpointing where locations are is because of descendants being able to tell, like, I know from family lore that this is where my ancestors were buried, or I know at one time this was where they had a cabin, or what, whichever, family story they've been told. I think I hadn't included the images, but one thing that's very interesting with James Madison's Montpelier is when you enter the estate, there's like a balcony that you can stand on. So when I first went to Montpelier in 2012, which is like, what, 9 years ago, I can't believe it, 9 years ago, you looked out at the view out at the landscape, and there was nothing there. But as archaeologists did more work in the South Yard, they found that there were actually slave cabins there. So years later, I was able to excavate at the South Yard, and now if you visit Montpelier, they've actually rebuilt those enslaved cabins. So having those cabins on display right next to this estate is very, controversial, I guess, to some, but very important in reclaiming and telling the full story of in the past. So I think you can't tell Madison's story without telling that, in fact, he was enslaved. And you can't just minimize their contributions to, something so minute when it was something that was, we kept everything going.
Yep.
So telling those contributions from the blacksmith's house that was there to what kind of food that those that worked in the kitchen cooked for the biggest events that occurred when Madison came back after his presidency. So I think, all of that can stem from oral history. And if it's not being passed down, it's going to die. So, yeah, very good point. I saw Gloria in the Miss Gloria in the comments. I want to say I remember seeing her when I came out to the Historical Society a few years ago with my mom. So yes, I did see you, and I remember it was a really important day. I'm trying to think who else is there, but I know my cousin Joanne Brock, who's also done genealogy, as well as archaeology excavations at Montpelier. She was there, and at that, I say my cousin now, but we didn't know that when we were sitting in the room. We started working with Miss Gloria on the computers to do some research, and like 10, 15 minutes later, we realized, wait, we're related. So please, like, once we're in person again, definitely attend Louisa County Historical Society events. I'm sure she's continuing those, but it was a really wonderful experience.
Yeah, and that is kind of our goal. As Marilyn Campbell said at the beginning, we're gonna try to do an oral history program in April, kind of make that oral history month. And we're gonna do some events in correspondence with that. And then we're gonna try, a few years ago, before COVID, there were research workshops specifically looking at how to do research for people who are dealing with the fact that they don't have records, particularly the descendants of enslaved communities, and dealing with issues that people don't often think of, which is, accessibility of records and disappearance of records. So we're going to do some workshops on that as the year progresses, and hopefully this wave of COVID starts to die down. We had one other question from one of the Moors, asking if you have done any writing about your journey to find your family history, or if you intend to do that.
I am currently writing, actually, so I am in the process of writing. I'm incorporating it into my master's thesis, so with hopes that I can convert that thesis into something that's published in a book format. But also, I don't talk about this a lot, but a lot of my background is in videography. When I was an undergraduate student, aside from excavating and doing genealogy, I was a videographer filming sporting events at VCU. So I definitely want to do something where, media is brought into it as well. Like, rather it's telling the Gilmore story or telling more likely something with my maternal great grandmother, because she raised my mother. So telling her story is something very important to me. And I wake up every morning. I wake up 5, 6 in the morning every morning and write. And working with other people, I do a lot of work. A lot of my genealogy research focuses with adoptees. So helping them tell their stories too. I see one of my favorite friends, Mr. Bernard, is in the room. So I just want to say hi to him. And yeah, just being able to help other people tell their stories as well is something that I just want to continue to do.
That's great. Yeah, I think a lot of people could benefit from reading it, and I personally would enjoy reading it. So,
I appreciate that. That motivates me. I'm like, sometimes you have so much you write, like as an academic, it's like we want to hold and share, like not, wait until we have the research done before we share. But I think with genealogy, you can't wait to share because it could help someone right then and there. And if you wait, like when the photos with the elders that I met, my elder Alfonso Vance, when I went to see him that summer in Kentucky, the next year he passed away. So if I had held off on seeing him, I wouldn't have been able to meet him. So just not holding off on sharing information, talking to people, seeing people is very important to, do it, immediately, versus the academic mindset of me. It's like, no, I got to get everything, where I want it, all my ducks in order. It's like, well, you wait on that, you're waiting too long. So yeah, I definitely would encourage people have public family trees on Ancestry. Even if you have a private one where you do research, have a public tree because it will help other people connect, with you, and they may know something. Very likely, they know something you don't know about your family because this is family you share. So that's my pointer right there. Let me see.
Just so we've had a couple comments about doing oral history interviews. Latika Lee, who is our oral history coordinator, has she beat me to the punch and put her contact information in there. And then the other thing I will say is there's a question in here about your experience and suggestions regarding DNA research and kind of interpreting and understanding the data that you get.
I have taken some classes, and I've done the Boston University genealogy program. So I've taken that information and incorporated into my research, but also just kind of, I think like a lot of genetic genealogists self-taught is a lot of it just working with other people in the community. But I can't stress enough for people joining their local AUGS chapters. They have such great presenters that are experts in the field. So like I'm still a member of the Richmond, as well as hopefully joining one in this area where I live in now. But if you're interested in learning more about genetic and DNA research, those are two places I would point people. But for me, I use it all the time. Like I feel like I'm pretty, like it's hard to say you're good or you're not good when there's not like an official school you can go to or whatever, things like that. But I have done it for a while, and it's definitely something I use when working with adoptees or those trying to determine a specific family lore if it's true.
Yeah, and I think those are great points. From my own personal journey, it's one of those things where it's trying to find those connections, and there's a lot of information to sift through. Just always when you get really excited about something, take a beat and let it process, because that's one of those things that, one of the most common mistakes with genealogical research is people see it and they just jump to the next conclusion, and not always the case.
Very good point.
Thank you.
Oh, we can hear you now. Hi, Miss Marilyn.
I had bounced out a few times. I just and reconnected. So thank you for such a wonderful program. And in the chat, we do have contact information, programs at louisahistory.org for me. If you want to program, if you want to donate, if you want further information about research we can do with you, for you, and any other activities. So just know we have ongoing projects. Caitlin mentioned about April. We have declared it as Oral History Month, and we have some satellite places where we can interview. One being the Louisa County Sargent Museum, the Historical Society Sargent Museum at 214 Fredericksburg Avenue, also the Shady Grove Rosenwald School in that community, and centrally more so with the library. But please call us. We welcome your call. We're in community together. We need your support. There is a need, and more we're finding that requests are coming in to help with the research. Just like Michelle's presentation today enlightened many of you and confirmed for many of you that the work is needed and it can be done. Thank you again.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate, I'll leave it open for anyone else who has any more questions. But one of the things is that if you miss contact information, you can always fill out our contact us form on the website, and that'll put you in contact with me. And we can kind of help you assess where you need to go. The other thing that I'd say is that, a lot of the times these events in research are based upon an individual's desire to know more about themselves and their family. And for me as well, you begin to fill out information that other people in your family didn't know. As you know, Michelle has pieced all of these different pieces together to kind of give a more complete story. And I would say, from the perspective of the Historical Society, we're here to help you, but we also appreciate you helping us, because just as much as you're finding out are things that are not included in our archive, in our collection, we're not as representative of the African American community in Louisa as we can be. And the only way that we can do that is by working together and building this relationship between people doing their research and the us who hold research. So, you know, just keep that in mind, and we're always willing to help you, and we hope you're willing to help us, so that we can kind of develop a more complete and representative history of Louisa County, because we can always do better at that. Does anyone have any other questions? Nope. Okay. Is there anything else you want to say, Michelle?
Just again, thank you so much. I, of course, have visited the Louisa County Historical Society in person. I'm so happy that you are charge, executive director. It's just such a privilege. I'm glad you have Miss Marilyn as a part of the team, because she's been so helpful throughout like all of my genealogy research. So just thank you again so much. Thank you to everyone who attended. I saw a lot of familiar names. So I just look forward to doing, you know, more stuff with you down the road.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
If anyone needs to reach out to me, I have my contact information on the page, but of course you can reach out to the Historical Society. They'll be able to give you that information.
Yep. I just want to thank you as well, and thank everyone for attending. This has definitely been a great kickstart to our programs and to Black History Month. So we look forward to seeing everyone in attendance next week at the Freedom of Choice installation, and then at our future programs. So thank you all, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.